Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're deconstructing courage, specifically why you literally cannot be brave without fear. I am so thrilled to guide you through this breakdown. We're going to kick things off with a scenario that, let's be honest, we all absolutely dread.
So picture this. You're walking home late at night, just minding your own business, when suddenly someone pulls a weapon on you and demands your valuables. You just bought a brand new phone, like the plastic screen protector is literally still on it. But to avoid getting hurt, to just protect yourself, you hand it over. You walk home totally fine physically, but mentally, you're running through a dozen different scenarios. You feel deeply humiliated. You're probably wondering, man, am I just a coward? You might even catch yourself wishing you had the so-called fearless courage of the mugger who just confronted you.
Which brings us to our first main question. Are you truly a coward?
Well, let's dismantle the cinematic illusion we've all been sold. We tend to imagine that bad guys, criminals, or villains are these inherently brave people whose hearts are just dead to fear. But the reality? Totally different. Most criminals aren't actually courageous at all. They're usually acting out of something else that they fear, like desperate poverty. Or they're just acting on blind, uncalculated impulse. And in some rare cases, they might suffer from severe psychological disorders that completely numb normal human emotions. And look, if you physically lack the capacity to feel fear or empathy, you aren't being brave. You're just broken.
And this actually perfectly aligns with a rather shocking historical revelation. When the famous philosopher Hannah Arendt attended the trial of the notorious Nazi officer Adolf Eichmann, she fully expected to see a bloodthirsty, fearless monster, a true classic villain. But instead, she discovered that the man responsible for sending countless people to their deaths was just a mundane, totally ordinary clerk who was simply following orders from behind a desk. There was no grand, fearless villainy there. It was just a complete and utter absence of human empathy.
Building on that, Canadian philosopher Douglas Walton argues that overcoming the fear of the law just to commit a crime? That is not bravery, because true courage inherently requires a noble, human motivation. A criminal acting out of pure brutality or exhibitionism is not being brave. True courage is this complex, deeply human drive to protect a loved one, to defend your property, or to stand up for a core value like justice. It has to have a noble anchor. Moving right along to our next section, courage between cowardice and recklessness. Let's see how ancient philosophy maps our reactions to danger.
The absolutely crucial point here is that Aristotle placed courage directly in the middle of a spectrum. On one far end, you have cowardice, right? That's when too much fear just completely paralyzes you. But on the other extreme, you have total recklessness, being completely devoid of fear. Like a reckless gambler risking his family's entire life savings on a whim, that is not courage, it's just destructive recklessness. True, noble courage exists right in that sweet spot in the middle. You feel the fear, absolutely, but you act rationally for a noble purpose anyway.
Which naturally leads us to our next part, steps to train for courage. It really begs the question, can bravery actually be learned, or is it just something you're born with?
Well, according to anthropologist Castle, it is absolutely a learned behavior. She outlines 5 specific stages of learning courage. First up is honesty, literally just admitting what actually scares you. Then comes choice, where you own the risks you're willing to take. Step 3 is vision, which is imagining yourself actually succeeding. Then intention, the solid commitment to try. And finally, execution. This means acting, failing, and trying again until it literally becomes a habit. It's kind of like a mountain climber. Nobody just wakes up and scales the deadliest peak on day 1, right? They start with simple hikes, then maybe add some ropes, and slowly build up their tolerance to risk through repeated exposure.
And psychologists studying American astronauts in the 1960s, along with soldiers in combat zones, found exactly this to be true. Familiarity breeds bravery. It's their relentless training for literally every possible scenario that gives them their courage. That repeated exposure massively reduces the fear of the unknown. When you turn a terrifying, super chaotic situation into a manageable, practiced routine, that paralyzing fear just naturally dissipates. And that leaves room for calculated, courageous action.
But hey, let's be real for a second. Most of us aren't astronauts or frontline soldiers. So let's look at fear versus existential anxiety, focusing on the everyday battles we all face.
The German philosopher Paul Tillich makes a vital distinction here, and it kind of changes everything. He totally separates fear from anxiety. See, fear is temporary. It has a specific, tangible target, like a really angry dog chasing you down the street. You can either run from it or confront it. But anxiety? Oh, anxiety is a formless, existential dread about the future. It doesn't have a specific face, and it just follows you everywhere.
Let me give you an example to make this concrete. Think of a mother who spent, say, 20 years expecting her daughter to become a doctor to carry on some family legacy. But then, out of nowhere, the daughter drops out of med school, dyes her hair green, and announces she's going to be a fine artist. The mother's explosive reaction to this isn't because she's literally afraid of her daughter. No, she's battling deep existential anxiety about an unknown future, the loss of all her expectations, and her total loss of control.
Tillich explains that to actually be brave in this situation, the mother has to convert that vague, overwhelming anxiety into a specific, tangible fear. She has to dig deep and identify that she is specifically afraid of, say, ruining her relationship with her daughter forever. Because once it's a specific fear, well, then she can rationally confront it. She can learn to let go of that control and bravely accept her daughter's new path.
He breaks this down into two types of courage we are constantly navigating in our daily lives. On one hand, we need the courage to be as a part. That's the bravery to submit to a group, like your family or society, sacrificing a bit of your own individuality for the greater good. But on the flip side, we fiercely need the courage to be as an individual. That is the bravery to stand completely alone, sometimes even against your own group, risking total isolation just to be true to yourself. Balancing these two takes immense daily bravery.
Which brings us to our final takeaway: no courage without fear. Let's bring this whole explainer back to our initial question, back to that dark street and the mugger who took your brand new phone.
So, are you really a coward if you got scared? The final verdict from philosopher Douglas Walton is a massive, resounding no. Courage is essentially resilience. It's your ability to make rational, calculated decisions to defend your values, all while actively experiencing fear. Deciding to hand over your phone because you rationally calculated that your physical safety was way more valuable than a piece of plastic, that is a highly rational decision under intense pressure. True courage isn't having a dead heart. It demands facing your genuine fear and acting correctly anyway.
You know, it's pretty fascinating how beautifully pop culture sometimes manages to capture these deep philosophical truths. Think about Game of Thrones. Young Bran Stark asks his father, "Can a man still be brave if he's afraid?" And Ned Stark replies, "That is the only time a man can be brave." It's such a brilliant quote, and it leaves us with this incredibly empowering realization. Your fear isn't proof of your cowardice. Actually, it is the absolute fundamental prerequisite for your bravery. So, what are you going to do with your fear the next time it shows up?